Hello, everyone. Oh, feels so strange to have a mic that actually talks. I think we should just start while we wait for the person that will join through Zoom. MP1 Bodera will be joining from Valencia through Zoom. Because there will be two parts to what we are going to do today. I'm going to make my own presentation, and then he will speak from an MP's perspective on the global stocktake and why it was important that members of parliament participated. But what I did was to carry out a survey of the participation of members of parliament in the global stocktake in 26 countries, randomly selected, but across the world, different geographies. As most of us already know, what the global stocktake is more like an audit process, some form of inventory where because of the Paris Agreement, the provisions of the Paris Agreement, parties and even non-parties are supposed to take stock of where they are in terms of taking action on climate. What has worked, what hasn't worked, how far have we gone? Do we need to do better? So that was why I like to call it an audit process. And because parliamentarians are the real auditors, it was very, very critical that parliamentarians were supposed to be part of that. And as we know, the GST had three different facets. The first one was information collection and preparation stage. Then there was the technical assessment, where you had technical experts look through the information that had been gathered from parties. And then the third one is more like the political one, where they consider the outputs, and then make decisions on what we should do next. And it was critical that we did the GST because by February next year, countries are supposed to be submitting updated NDCs, what we call NDC 3.0. So the GST was intentioned to form the background, to provide some form of spur for increased ambition. And so what it did was to come up with 17 findings and 4 areas, namely climate change context, mitigation, adaptation, then implementation and financing of climate action. But for us, because we understand the critical role that members of parliament have to play when it comes to actually taking proper actions, it was important to measure, did they really participate during the GST? And if they did, in what format did the participation come? I say this because it's always been my belief that members of parliament because of their critical role as both representatives of the people, they can hold government to account. And so they are like the bridge between the people and the government. So they are well positioned due to their constitutional role to be able to evaluate how far the government is going in terms of taking action. So we decided to check to see if exactly members of parliament participated. The research methodology, we did 2 things. The first thing we did was to send out a survey to members of parliament and parliamentary staff, and of course, staff of parliamentary networks like Globe, Climate Parliament, to gather their information. Then the next thing we did was to carry out a desktop review, scout through the net to see information that we could gather on whether or not members of parliament carried out this. Important to point out that how we did it was to look at available data or information within a certain period. And so anything that goes beyond March of 2024 wasn't considered as part of the GST. But anything building up to that moment, but especially within 2023, coming down to COP28, we considered as part of the GST process. Now, it's possible that members of parliament could have participated without consciously doing so. But the key thing is that when you hold your government accountable to see what exactly are you doing in terms of meeting our goals, let's say our NDCs or meeting our net zero targets, or in terms of budgeting or budget implementation, within this period, or revising a law or even enacting a new one is considered to be part of the GST intervention of that said parliament. And so we looked at 26 parliaments, namely the European Union Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, UK Parliament, Finnish Parliament, Swedish, Ugandan, Nigerian, South African, East African Legislative Assembly, Kenyan Parliament, Mexican Parliament, Uruguayan Parliament, Brazilian Parliament, Maltese Parliament, Indian Parliament, Australian Parliament, the Philippines, Estonia, Ghana, Argentina, Morocco, Egypt, Congress of the Federated States of Micronesia, New Zealand, Taiwan, and of course, the US. But for the US, we didn't just do at the federal level. We also looked at the state level parliaments to see what they had done, and how this impacted on the entire stocktake process for the United States. Now, you would see that, you notice from the names I called that we try to touch every every region or every geographic location. It wasn't possible to do this for all of the countries of the world, so we just sampled some of them. Now, what we found out was that for different parliaments, there were different ways through which they engaged. For some, it was through debates. There were parliaments where debates were held. The UK Parliament, for instance, the Scottish Parliament, for instance, where they invited the minister to come and speak to what they are doing. There were others where there were new legislation. I know that the Philippines actually submitted climate accountability bill during this particular period. There are others where instead of submitting a brand new bill, they revised it. For instance, the Parliament of Kenya had to amend their Climate Change Act to reflect the new trajectory that the country was going, which was in terms of combining climate action with sustainable development and then looking at carbon markets and all of that. So for some countries, it was that. And for some, it was through committee meetings, where they would meet and then take a decision. Egypt is an example. Egypt is also an example of a country that actually tried to pass a legislation within this period. Then there were others that did regional engagements, leveraging on regional engagements as a means of trying to take increased action. Now, the whole of Africa was a little bit like this because there was, during the Africa Climate Action Week in 2023, there was a legislative summit where members of parliament from all of Africa came together with focus on renewables and climate-smart agricultural practices. Then the small island states also did the same thing because I remember that there was also a gathering in, I think, Fiji then, but that was how the Federated States of Micronesia Parliament participated. Then others, it was just by coming to COP to engage with people and, of course, engage with their own government. Some developed knowledge-sharing information. The Scottish Parliament is a good example of this through their SPICE network. SPICE is an information-sharing platform that is being operated by the Scottish Parliament, and it's actually one of the best practices that we identified because it shares key information and it provides technical support in terms of knowledge base and everything for members of parliament. We figured that this is actually a very good way of maybe getting members of parliament to do more in different countries. There are others who had an interface with the executive. Of course, I mentioned earlier on that the Scottish Parliament also invited the minister then. In the UK, it's a little bit like it's difficult to separate both of them because the minister is also, Stuart was also a member of parliament. So, but there were interfaces. Egypt also had an interface with the executive. When we finished looking through all of this, it was easy to just look at it. Why didn't members of parliament really participate? Because there were some of them who explicitly told me, for instance, someone from Estonia explicitly told me that they did not participate in GST process because there is no framework for legislative participation in the executive process when it comes to climate change. And so we identified this as a key problem. There has to be a way in which the legislature can interface with the executive on key issues like this. One other thing that we identified is lack of technical support. Now, there are a number of parliamentarians who have the passion to actually do all of these things, but they do not have the technical expertise to be able to do that. So you can walk to an MP, maybe at the House of Representatives in Nigeria, and tell the person to engage, in the GST process, and he or she wouldn't have heard anything about it. So there is this huge gap in terms of technical expertise, especially when it comes to developing countries. We also identified the lack of awareness, yeah, which is somehow linked with technical expertise, because you need to first be aware before you can seek the knowledge. Yeah, so one other thing that we identified is the poor integration of MPs into the UNFCCC process. And this is really, really bad, because one of the reasons why we've always struggled, the first time we had a parliamentary pavilion was last year in Dubai. And so this year we continue to do that. But the key thing is that we understand that parliaments have a critical role to play when it comes to all of this. So why are they not properly recognized within the framework of the UNFCCC? So that's a key problem. So what the parliamentary group is just an informal group till now. As we speak, there is an ongoing meeting about how we can find a way to formalize it for the parliamentary constituency to become a formal constituency instead of just an informal group that does not have a direct link with the UNFCCC process. So after doing all of this, we decided to look at what we consider the legislative best practices that can be replicated. The very first one is the one by the by the UK. Anybody familiar with the UK Climate Change Act, which we know was the very first one, very first global climate change act, is the setting up of a committee. You know, what we try to replicate when we are writing the climate change bill in Nigeria. We call ours a National Council on Climate Change. So, but the UK has a climate change committee, which is an independent body, different from the government, but so it provides expert evaluation of what they are doing, and so holds government accountable and feeds Parliament with information. So we think that this is a very good one. It's a way of having an independent body that regulates what both Parliament does and what the executive does, you know, but using their technical expertise. In Nigeria, when we tried to recreate it, we missed it a little bit, because what we did was to now allow the National Council to be populated primarily by politicians, you know. But the idea behind us was to get the government, the president, to be the one who takes the biggest decision. But we consider climate to be a very key thing. So the president should be the one in charge. And for different countries, different things could work. But we do think that what the UK is doing in terms of having an independent climate change committee that interrogates both the legislature and the executive is a critical best practice that could be looked into by other countries. Then there is this other best practice that we noticed, which is a collaboration between parliaments to be able to come up with either laws or ways of engagement. I know for a fact that Climate Parliament, one of our partners, did this extensively in Africa in the lead up to last year's COP. So what they did was to hold what they call climate change law webinars, you know, where MPs from Nigeria already has a climate change act, Uganda with the climate change act, Kenya with the climate change act, can come and talk to other MPs about their experiences, you know, the challenges that they faced in being able to do this, and then to encourage them on how they can do this. So we consider this to be a good practice, you know, where parliaments from different countries, but within the same region, can collaborate, you know, share ideas and share ways that they can actually get this done. The other one is the SPICE thing that I talked about, the Scottish Parliament Information Centre. So they share information and they provide expertise. For instance, when we're doing this research, it's easy to know everything that happens in the Scottish Parliament. All you need to do is just go through the SPICE information index, and then you have everything that you need. The same thing with the UK. But over 60% of parliaments in the world do not have information online. And that's not good. You know, we should be able to easily access what's happening, you know, in terms of what the committee is doing, what the parliament on its own is doing when it comes to climate change. The next practice that we consider to be a very good one is to leverage on regional fora to be able to address action. And I mentioned earlier on that I saw this with what the small island development states were doing, you know. So if you look at what Fiji is doing, you can be motivated to also see if you can do yours. Or if you look at what, let's say, FSM is doing, you can also be motivated. So we think that these forms of interaction could be collaborative, and they could produce good results. But in all of this, we have identified the gaps and the challenges, but then how do we think the members of parliament can be supported to be able to do more during the next GST? Because it's a 5-yearly thing. So in the next 4 years, we will be doing this again. it's not enough to identify the gaps, but how can we support members of parliament to be able to participate fully next time? We think that it's important to ensure that there are proper media engagements on the GST and NDCs generally. So this brings some form of awareness both to the constituents who can question their MPs and of course drive up MPs' desire to do more, because the people are the currency for politicians and members of parliament basically. And so if you get them to get interested and ask questions, it follows that their MP would also be motivated to ask questions and ask, what are we doing when it comes to this? The next one is capacity building and education. The proper capacity building of MPs is necessary. And I think that it's something that the various networks that make up the parliamentary group should begin to look at, gradually. I mentioned earlier on about climate parliament. I'll mention them again because I know that a few weeks, just last week again, they had another training. The South African Development Commission Parliamentary Forum has been doing series of trainings over the past few months. The same thing for Parliamentarians, for the Latin and Caribbean area. The next one is to provide access to expert opinion and support. And I do think that this is something that should be domiciled in every parliament. Every parliament should have an expert support group that provides small capacity in terms of whatever you want to do. So for the Committee on Climate Change, there has to be, and there is need to have an expert group that would be stationed to provide support. Then there is need to enhance the information sharing process. Climate change is not a secret code. So we should share the information that we have both with the people and then, of course, between members of parliament. There is also need to strengthen parliamentary committees. It could be in terms of providing funding. It could also be in terms of providing technical support for them and even helping them to establish the technical offices that would help support their work. So this is very, very important. There is also the need for members of parliament to constantly engage with others in international fora. Perhaps as you have been coming around here, you would have learned one or two things, and if you continue to do that, let's say there is an international forum next week and you go for that, but sponsored by other people, other organizations and something like that, you would continue to learn. And the things you learn from there, you can always bring back. A good example is what happened with the Nigerian climate change bill. The man who just left, the Honorable Sam Onibo, was the person who sponsored it. And he did tell me that his motivation to sponsor the climate change bill during Nigeria's 8th Assembly in 2016 was after he attended the COP21 in Paris. And so at the end of the Global Legislative Summit there, they were all charged to go back home and make laws and drive policy actions that would help promote climate action within their countries. And so he came back and he ran with that. So it's important to always find a way to get members of parliament to be engaged in international forum. Then the last one is to find a way to always replicate whatever best practice that you have noticed elsewhere. If you see that this is working here, you try and go for it. Thank you very much. And I would now like to invite... Oh, clap for me, clap for me, clap for me. It's very, very important. Nobody was clapping. Honorable Wan Badara, are you ready now? Okay. Sorry, let me get the volume. Can we get him on? He doesn't need...
First of all, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I would like to introduce some points and then I will show some slides. While there are differences that should be highlighted and are evident in this report, there is not a single government in the rich countries that is tackling climate change as it should, because the risk of increasingly powerful extreme events are spreading across the globe. In the Mediterranean, it's my region. I'm from Valencia, a place that suffered a big flood last week. We are in a climate hotspot. We are suffering from it, but also other regions of the world are ignoring the alarms and underestimating the risks. For example, the Nordic and Anglo-Saxon countries, which are often held up as examples of better transitions, are underestimating the risk of collapse of the most important ocean current for the European climate, specifically for those countries further north. This is the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. Many scientists and reports have tackled this increasing risk of collapse. And this collapse, which would also greatly change the climate in the southern hemisphere, no? So in the report, it's okay that they highlighted that the UK enacted the world's first climate change law. That would become the basis, no, for climate legislation in other countries. But we have to be clear about that. What we have seen lately in the UK under a Labour government is how a non-solution like carbon capture and storage is funded with 22 billion pounds. In the Swedish Parliament, Sweden was making contributions and preparing for a submission of NDCs in 2025 and specifically adopted a new energy target aimed to a 100% fossil-free electricity. I think this is key also. Energy and electricity are not the same thing. Electricity in industrialized countries is often only 20% of the energy use. And this is creating some confusion in a crucial debate, which I think this needs to be clearly said. Does not seem possible in any way to achieve net zero fossil-free economic model when we are insisting on denying that infinite growth is not possible on a finite planet. So one of the problems that we have to tackle is the economic model of growth. Climate crisis is also a health issue. This year has underlined the growing impacts of a warming climate on people's health and well-being. Extreme heat in India led to 700 deaths and over 40,000 cases of heat stroke. Climate exacerbated rains caused the collapse of a major dam in Nigeria, killing 320 people, affecting 1 million and leading to malnutrition in over 500,000 children under 5. In the US, 48 of the 50 US states are experiencing more moderate or worse drought, impacting agriculture and increasing fire risks. Europe, well, we have suffered several floods this year, the most recent in my country, which has left also hundreds of deaths and increasing economic damages. In Libya, the last year, the attribution studies shown that the flooding that they experienced in 2023, that killed more than 10,000 people, was 50 times more likely due to climate change. No? We can no longer live thinking in transitions plans made in Excel sheets that are increasingly outdated in a climate change situation which is accelerating, exponentially accelerating, I would say. So we need they need to broaden the democratic participations of citizens and science in the political decisions it's one of the key issues, I think. We need science and the people who know their territories more increasingly having power to make these decisions. No? Disasters such the one that we have just suffered in Valencia region show very well that the political leviathans that we have built do not work to face these challenges, which require more coordinated and faster response with a better knowledge of the reality of each territory. Global warming is now a global collapse warning. I would like to present a few slides that will tell some of the story of the climate reality that we have. I think you will see now. So, okay. Some points of no return in the first slide. Yeah. Yeah, you can see in the first slide that some points of no return may have already been passed. As we can see, the limit has been set lower and lower at the temperature needed to pass these crucial points, bringing them closer and closer to the temperature we already have. Here in the second slide, you can see the Earth's radiative balance, which is the best measure of the disaster. No, it's absolutely out of whack. We are 5 times higher. The values are higher than when the melting of huge ice sheets, much larger than the ones we have now, occurred like 100,000 years ago. So we need to tackle this and specifically to know that this increasing net flux of Earth's energy imbalance, it's also related to some measures that have been, I think they are well played, because we have to reduce also the aerosols of the fossil ships and planes. But when we reduce these aerosols concentrations, what we have seen is the anomalies of temperature, specifically in the sea surface temperature, get higher and higher, because these aerosols, which are bad for the health of the people, well, they played a key role in specifically diminishing the radiation that impact to the oceans, no? And specifically targeting the energy transitions, we need to know that I like a lot this graph from Art Bergman, which is, I think, one of the better scientists understanding this transition we need to do. We are in a situation that we are making plans that seem like magical thinking. We are now trying to make these transitions very fast, but the results don't come so fast. So one of the key issues that we need to address, this is the last slide, is how these countries that are increasingly making these benefits and big business, this is the rich countries need to change. I think this is a well model to see how this is needed. This is the donut economics, which can provide a framework to work with, because it shows which countries need to reduce fast as they can, as fast as they can, which countries are more or less in the regions near what should be done. We can have like Costa Rica or Mauritius Island or Colombia, like one of the best examples. And there are some other countries that need to rise, that need to grow, because this model needs to shift as fast as we can. But there are some countries that they can't provide the basic needs for the people. So there are 3 different approaches we have to tackle in this model, this economic growth in a finite planet that is crashing against the limits. So to finish, I would like to say 2 or 3 things. This disparity between what the scientific community is warning about, no, and what we need to do. It's also a big problem what the mainstream media and what the major policymakers they are showing us. No, the key problem of education, of awareness, of responsibility, and lack of information is one of the biggest problems, because we, as an MP, I can say in the parliaments we have climate deniers, we have people that are well surrounded by big business, so it's impossible. No, there's a key quote from an English writer that said, an American English writer, that said that it's impossible for a man to acknowledge something when his salary depends on not understanding. No, we have to, as fast as we can, increasingly put scientists in the political decisions, and increasingly we need this increasing business mentality to get out these political decisions. And moreover, there is a clear need for much better respect for those scientists and activists who are protesting, demanding more coordinated actions. Because if we try to silence or even imprison the boldest voices for economic interests, the result of this cannot be good. And I would like to finish tackling one key issue, I think, because in Palestine, in Gaza, and many other places, what we are seeing now is a genocide, a criminal genocide. We are still spending millions and millions and tremendously valuable resources, which probably we need these resources to be implemented in these climate transitions. We must see a big change in that thing also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very, thank you very much, MP1. Again, what you've just summed up is part of what the GST has already said. The science is very, very clear on it. We need to increase ambition and enhance action. But the critical thing always remains, what can members of parliament do to get this done? And you did mention that even in parliament that you have a whole lot of climate deniers and all of that. I do think that even though I had made the presentation, I should be asking the questions too. Which is, how can Parliament overcome this issue of having, or being stunted, not being able to push through some of these critical agenda? So for instance, we know for a fact that we need to cut down or totally phase out fossil fuel. We know that we need to take action in terms of trying to prepare for disaster like we witnessed in Valencia. But what exactly is the reason why members of parliament are not doing these things? So these are some of the questions. But again, I made the presentation, but I'm going to ask you the question, please. Thank you. And then
thank you so much. I think one of the key issues is, as I said, we need politicians that are not surrounded by big business mentality. Some big companies that are responsible for these kind of problems are also running some of the transition models that we have been implementing. And one of the things that we need the most, I think, is this kind of climate assemblies, participation democracy that is in the making now. We have had one of these climate democracies, citizen assemblies here in Spain. We have one. We had one in France. We had one in Ireland, which specifically target one problem there, which is the abort kind of thing, and there was a big clash between these two political visions of that they get well with a democratic revolution. We need a democratic revolution with some. We need to do things very different in the parliaments, because what we have seen now is obvious that it's not enough. And as Einstein said, we can do the same thing and expect a different result.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Juan. I hear you saying that we need parliamentarians who are not involved in the businesses relating to climate change, and I think that would be a major shortfall if you need parliamentarians who can champion the climate change dialogue. But at the same time, I hear you explaining the science behind all of this, and I think that's important. And I think the issue there is how do we translate the science, the language of science, to everyday language, so that parliamentarians can understand what's going on and be able to convey the same information to the public at the same time. And at the same time, if you have MPs in Parliament who understand the science in the everyday language, they would be more able to take action in terms of their functions, the lawmakers or participating in webinars like what he was telling us. And I think that's important to keep in mind the fact that you need strong parliamentarians to carry this through the parliament of their own countries.
Of course, we need to do better art to tell these kind of issues. We need to have better mainstream medias, because I would say that in my country we don't have, I think, as big problem as in other countries with the media, but it's criminal. Some of them, of how it's tackled this climate issue, how it's how it's talked to the people, how it's criminalized some of the people that are doing this kind of actions to warn the people, because as we saw with the reduction of the labor work time, and as we saw with the vote of the woman, no, in some of the European countries, this was led by some disruptive kind of civil disobedience actions that are not violent, that only try to warn the people. And we, in this climate crisis, are increasingly putting these people in jails. So it's impossible for a society to acknowledge what is the problem, because the loudest voices, the most brave people are criminalized, are sentenced and put in prison. So we have to do a lot better in how we communicate this. But also, I think we need to pressure the ones that are responsible for this communication to not being as good as it should be. We need to change how the mainstream media works, because it's clear as water that these are one of the main responsibles of not telling people what this crisis is and what this crisis should be, no? Because we know that, of course, in the Mediterranean and other hotspots, we will have worse disasters than we have suffered now, no? And for example, in the recent floods in Valencia, 31% of the GDP of our region will be affected by this only event. So this is an issue that it's increasingly more clear that even with that kind of business mentality, that it's the most common mentality also in the mainstream media, it cannot be defended that we economically need to not grow, or still there are some key sectors, no, like, I don't know, publicity, aviation, guns, and this kind of stuff needs to be shifted as fast as we can. And there are other sectors like ecological, agro-industrial, no, or education or health issues that needs to grow even in the richer countries, no. So it's a question. We have to question all the model of all the economic model.
Thank you very much. Any other?
Yeah, my other question is for you, Namika. When you mentioned webinar is a form of sharing information, and I think that's very relevant for the Pacific island countries, small and sparsely distributed across the oceans of Pacific. Then we need that kind of arrangement so that we can share and develop a community of practice, so we can share the best practice in countries. And you mentioned Fiji, and I think Fiji is leading the way for all of the Pacific Islands in terms of having the climate change frameworks in place and their laws. I think some parliaments, I don't know about Fiji, but Tonga is now looking at the IPU standards, benchmarks. I think was issued in 2006 and reviewed 2018. But some of the things that the benchmarks is talking about to do with strengthening the committees. providing the committees with the authority to demand information that they need to know, or to get information that the committee needs to have so that they can have make appropriate decisions, and also inform the Parliament in terms of the work of the committee. And I think those two things are becoming a reality in some parliaments in the Pacific. But Tonga is one country looking at the benchmarks to have some kind of arrangements like committee system be strengthened, as well as dialogue among the countries, the Pacific. And I think those are good things for the future to enable us to move on with what's required to take climate action.
Thank you very much. I think that it's all about, we agree generally that it's all about trying to improve the expertise and knowledge base of MPs, and then to also ensure that by improving the expertise and knowledge base, they are also motivated to do more and take more action, because nobody else is going to really be as forceful and as effective as MPs. You know, citizens can always make demands, but MPs have a way of actually getting government to get something done. And so that's why the role of MPs is very, very key, you know, to the entire UNFCCC process, to the entire global world process, governance process, you know. So it's important that we agree on this and then begin to look for ways to empower Parliament to do more and to take more action. Juan, do you have any other thing to say?
No, it's only I have to say that these COPs, no, these kind of meetings also need the same kind of change of mentality. No, we are seeing increasingly that these COPs are useful. There is like a key question. No, we have also the same problem that we have in the parliaments or in the mainstream media. I work as a climate journalist before becoming an MP. And I think it's the same. I have covered so many COPs as a journalist, and we need that kind of business mentality getting out of these COPs as fast as we can, because it's the same. It's the same problem. We need. I can't see any way to tackle this as fast as we can without the civil society taking the key paper that it needs to have, no, to protest, to organize, to try to pressure that kind of business mentality and people in power. Because if they don't see the alarms, if they don't see the science that is made, we need to make sure that they will see it and they will hear it.
Thank you very much. So with that, we'll bring it to a wrap. Thank you very much to everyone who joined us, both those who joined online through our live stream, one who joined us from Valencia, and those who joined us here. Let me end by just pointing out that the survey that I talked about is the product of a work that we did with the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. It's called a Global Survey on Parliamentary Engagement in the GST. We would make this available to members of Parliament very soon. Thank you very much, and God bless you.